I believe the floor was with Senator Dueñas. Senator Dueñas, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also thank you, Mr. Chair, for the courtesy of being able to basically do the proper methodology or the accepted methodology of issuing and handing out amendments. So at this time, Mr. Speaker, having withdrawn my amendment that was to bring the substitute bill out, I'm going to pass out two amendments that I'm going to proffer with regard to the current bill 79 as substituted by the committee, and I would like to discuss those amendments, Mr. Speaker.
All right. You still have the floor. You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, prior to going into the discussion on the amendments, which basically there are two amendments, but basically one supports the other in terms of going back to the original version of Bill 79 to allow for Bill 79 as originally introduced to be a multi-year appropriation. Mr. Speaker, prior to my discussion real quickly, Guam Housing has come down and provided a schedule of their current funding situation, which will show appropriately that there is not $4+ million available to Guam Housing for the purposes of their loan programs. It actually, Mr. Speaker, and I say this for the benefit of the members of the floor, so as I discuss the amendments, they can go through and realize how committed these funds actually are, and then they'll have a clearer picture of why the audit report that was presented in yesterday's testimony is incorrect in terms of their actual cash on hand. You will find at the conclusion of your review, Mr. Speaker, and members of the body, that they actually only have approximately $4 million on hand, $400,000 on hand, and that is not going to take them very far over the balance of the fiscal year and into the new fiscal year. So basically, Mr. Speaker, on the amendments that I've passed out, we're dealing now with true numbers. Mr. Speaker, in order to discuss true numbers, we simply go back to the committee report, where Tony Blas, the Deputy Director of the Department of Administration, represented that the achievement schedule to realize the $2.1 million will take up to 3 fiscal years, possibly out to 2016, in order to be able to actually realize that $2.1 million of that achievement schedule, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also, if we just go now into the committee report also, I'm going to continue to use the committee report as a reference because I believe that actually supports the original version of Bill 79, Mr. Speaker. If you look at that, you see the testimony of the good speaker from Barrigada, which basically says, at the inception of this program, there was 0.01% of the GRT committed to this program. And many families, perhaps in the hundreds, took advantage of this program, Mr. Speaker. And what had happened was, he says in the committee report and supports the fact that there was a non-commitment from future governors to continue to allow for that set aside of that GRT to stay committed to this very valuable program. So essentially, with federal funds and the like, this program continued to kind of putter along, Mr. Speaker. However, it was never realized its true veracity of the program over the years. Now, we know that several fiscal years back, Madam Speaker, there was a $500,000 appropriation for this program, and it proved to be extremely successful. Madam Speaker, I would also just like to say and make a point for the record that when we're talking about this program, we're not just talking about any program. We're talking about a program that provides opportunities for those who are, as the testimony from Director Beneventi, people falling through the cracks. They which would really be equivalent to their loan mortgage, Madam Speaker. The problem is, and as was experienced with these 70 families that realized their dream of home ownership, if you take in the current market, Madam Speaker, a modest home purchase of $180,000, by the time you finance 95%, you need 5% additional, and you need the closing costs. This is upwards of $18,000, Madam Speaker, which puts it out of the range of the average person just trying to get into that home. That is why it's so critical at this time in our economy, when we know our construction is slow, when our contractors are starving to just paint houses and do renovations to keep their people employed, that this type of economic activity, building affordable housing, building housing for those who otherwise are paying rent, this opportunity exists. Madam Speaker, you can poll the banks as well, and this is a true fact. In approximately 3 years, there are 3, if not more, banks on the island that are going to opt out because of the Dodd-Frank amendment, legislation in the federal government, that they will no longer finance up to 95%. They may not even finance up to 90%, Madam Speaker. That would completely take thousands of our people out of the market. This program is needed. This program is vital. This program is viable. Madam Speaker, we not need to look far. Gura didn't show up, but they represented the many families that are on the voucher program that otherwise have disposable income to pay a $600 or $700 mortgage, Madam Speaker. It is for those reasons and those true numbers and those true facts that, Madam Speaker, I would close with what I discussed on the main motion prior to moving my amendments yesterday, Madam Speaker. The $500,000 generating $12 million of economic activity, which generates $500,000 in GRT, is a simple mathematical equation. It shows you, without question, that you arrive back at your exact amount of money in excess with the $2 million that you would invest of GRT derived as if you were just to go ahead and take that money realized and put it in the abyss called the general fund. Madam Speaker, it has no value, in my opinion, when we talk about the understanding that this government pays 90 to 95% of its expenditures on tax base on salaries and benefits, that there is no realization of economic opportunity or multiplier when you simply subsidize that general fund with an infinitesimal percentage when you base it on how you would say, what is $2 million compared to what it would be on an $800 million annual budget. Members on this floor, good friends of mine, senators who have advocated, the Vice Speaker, I have to use their terms, Madam Speaker, that is DI math. It's simply DI math. This formula was represented by a very well-respected member of our community, Mr. Carlos Camacho, who has built hundreds of homes, who has put his stake on Guam to be able to help families in affordable housing. There is no question about this formula, Madam Speaker. It's sustainable, it's responsible, it makes common sense to continue to allow the multi-year appropriation to go forward to realize true economic opportunity, the realization of home ownership to our people, and real economic driver vitalization for our community, Madam Speaker. There's absolutely no question with regard to that. And so I ask members of this body to please support these amendments which will allow for multi-year appropriation. And if this body in the next couple of years sees that this program is not viable, sees that there's been a windfall in another area, or Guam Housing now becomes the shining star and the federal government wants to just pump all kinds of revenue into that, we have the option, Madam Speaker, to take that money and move it somewhere else, or if we want to, simply put it in the general fund, if that's what we want to do. But Madam Speaker, I move that that is not the responsible thing to do right now, and I ask this body to please support these amendments, as this body has the power to do whatever it wishes to do on an annual basis with the fiscal year budget. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's help our families. Please pass these amendments. Thank you, members of the body.
Vice Speaker, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to speak on this amendment. First, let me preface by saying I support the program 150%. But I think the retiring speaker in the movement's most eloquent statement was the last one. This legislature has, on an annual basis, the ability to be able to do whatever needs to be done with the budget and move the money back as if necessary. Madam Speaker, I am concerned about the fact that we are now making multi-year appropriations, and I really, really want to caution the members about what we're doing. I know many of you thought that I was little Linus screaming that the sky was falling when I wouldn't vote for any of the bond measures. Because the figures that were being given to us by the administration kept insisting that they were taking into account realignment money that wasn't military realignment money that wasn't going to be coming due, and we know isn't going to be coming due at least until 2020. And even the defense minister of Japan, who's coming next week, is recognizing the fact that because of the sequestration, it may not happen even as early as 2020. And yesterday, the young senator from Dededo via Talafofo, or Talafofo via Dededo, tried to get it to be a one-year appropriation because we are facing a huge payment on those bond issues that I refused to support several years ago. And that's coming due, and we'll have to do that in the next fiscal year. Madam Speaker, I used this opportunity because I failed yesterday to give a report to the legislature of the assignment that you gave me the other evening. You asked me to attend the hearing at the district court on the Luzon landfill. And I want to report to this legislature at this point that we have some grave financial obligations that are not being addressed, and we may be getting stuck with under this consent decree very, very soon. At the hearing yesterday, the receiver made mention that he had neglected to include in his calculation of how much we needed to borrow when we borrowed the 200. He neglected to put in an amount for the post-closure costs of the ORDOT dump. He reported yesterday that for 30 years of post-closure operations, there needs to be $18 million in a trust account, endowment account, to be able to keep ORDOT closed for the 30 years after they finally finish capping it. We need to have $18 million in that endowment account, or that's how much it's going to cost. And he figures that with interest rates, if we put $15 million into an account today, that we would be able to have the $18 million during the 30-year period to take care of the closure. That's $15 million that we hadn't taken into account. Also yesterday, the landowners of the Luzon area that the government took came in and reported to the court, the Superior Court of Guam, has issued an order finding that the Ledzon property owners are owed $26 million for their property. $26 million. The government of Guam put in $3 million into escrow account at the Superior Court for the condemnation. We are short $25 million. The judgment in that case is costing this government $110,000 a month. A month. That's 4 months of this program. They're demanding that the receiver take some of that bond money and pay them off now so that they don't have to be accumulating the interest payments. One of the lawyers for the landowners mentioned that if we put this off for a couple of years, we will have accumulated an additional $2 million in interest payments. That's more than all the money that you were planning on putting into this program in interest payments. We have to figure out where we're going to get $25 million today in order to avoid paying $110,000 a month in interest payments. That plus the 15 is $40 million that was not taken into account in the $200 million bond that we floated over my objections. On top of it, they had another report that there are 19 sections of Route 4 that need to be enhanced for safety purposes. Though I don't have an engineering degree, having lived in Talafofo, in one of the narrowest areas there, I knew that the trucks going down couldn't fit. But they persisted in placing that landfill at Ledzon. A number of times I went to the court and I wailed about the fact that they would need to replace the bridges. Their Parsons consultant kept insisting the bridges were strong enough. I kept saying anybody, even without a engineering degree or DI math, would know those bridges are not going to be able to handle the loads that would be going down there. For 2 hearings, they insisted that it would. Finally, at the 3rd hearing, they finally admitted they were wrong and that the bridge needs to be strengthened. But because we didn't have any money, their brilliant idea was to just strengthen the lane going south. Thankfully, highway funds or defense access roads were able to pay for the bridges, and both sides have been fixed. But now we have these 19 segments of roadway that need to be fixed. They're saying, well, they need to be able to put some cement on the one side or some kind of strengthening on one side so when the trucks turn, they won't go into oncoming traffic. 19. You heard last week Carl Dominguez announce that in that small little less than 1 mile stretch before you get to Jeff's Pirates Cove, if you're coming into town from Talafofo, where 2 women have been seriously injured because their car skid off the road within the last 2 months, that DPW is finally going to resurface that area. Resurface, Madam Speaker. And that small segment, less than a mile, was going to cost $1.5 million. Their report of wanting to fix 19 segments, I'm afraid is going to cost us $1 million for each one of the sections that they're planning on doing. In fact, one section, as Alonso, is so bad. Those of you that drive south, and you know when you get to Alonso and you're coming down the curve, you see that there's this major dip. Well, they've gone through, the engineers have gone and realized that the compacting under there was not sufficient. They had 3 proposals. One, close off Route 4 going south and north, close off Route 4 down in that area for 6 months, dig that whole thing out, and compact it. Go in, put in 4 inches, compact it, put in 4 inches, compact it 4 inches, until you get back up. 6 months. You would have a great time coming into work every morning, coming around the other side of the island. Their second recommendation was to put a retaining wall, which was going to cost about $5 million, or at least that's what they thought. The compacting and the retaining wall was going to cost 6 months. I mean, $5 million. The difference was going to be time. One was going to close up, for the first option of recompacting was going to close Route 4 for 6 months. The retaining wall was going to close 1 lane for the 6 months while they put up the retaining wall, but that was going to be $5 million. Or they would just kind of monitor it and see when it falls, and then you can deal with it as you're coming into work one day. We have $15 million in the endowment for the post-closure cost, $25 million that's owing to the landowners, increasing by $1.2 million a year in interest payments as we speak. You have 19, if not 20-some million dollars, closer to 30, in road reconstruction that's going to be necessary. That's $70 million that we didn't put into that $200 million bond to fix that, to put the landfill down there. I would love to be able to fund this program. But I think for the next couple of years, we're going to have to take every penny that we have and put it into a savings account to try to figure out how we're going to meet that first huge $23 million increase in the bond payments in the upcoming fiscal year. And then we're going to have to try to figure out where we're going to get at least 40, if not $70 million to fix the roads going to Luzon. I implore all of you, I would love to underwrite some of these programs, but we've got to start putting some money aside, because the buildup that everybody thought we were going to have, that we put into all the financial statements that underwrote all of were the underpinnings of all of those bonds that we went and got. The 200 for Luzon, and the over 300 for the tax refunds, all those were dependent on build-up money. That isn't happening. And at age 62, it may not be happening in my lifetime. For some of the younger members here, they'll probably have the opportunity to have to figure out how to make those payments. But the time has come for us to be as frugal as possible. Every place that we think that we found a bonanza of escheat funds, whether it's $400,000 2 million, 2.8 million, whatever the number is, we have to realize that we have a huge payment that's coming up, and we have at least $70 million in additional costs that we haven't even anticipated that we need to try to fund. So I would have no problem with whatever the amount is in the sheet account going for this 1 year, just for a small, quick stimulus. But in upcoming years, we can't just say shall escheat forever and ever, because we may need to try to figure out that we may need that $400,000 to pay 4 months of interest payments because we haven't been paying the landowners. We may need the $2 million to be able to float it, to get us through. As your representative yesterday, Madam Speaker, I felt it my responsibility to report back to this body and say, though I support this program, we have to be reasonable and responsible, and the time has come for us to finally hold on to our pocketbooks and make sure that we have some money to be able to make some of these payments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Mr. Vice Speaker. On the motion, Senator Munya Barnes, you're recognized.
Manana Sidus, Madam Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this bill, whether it be the amendment or the main motion or what have you. After yesterday's discussion, Madam Speaker, I really had to go back home and reflect as Oversight Chair of Housing on what I could do to make things right or do things right from my heart with what was presented today. And I'm not going to deny what the retiring speaker spoke about. But when I came into this 27th when the 32nd Guam Legislature, I came in with the thought that when I first came in the 27th Guam Legislature, it was said that if you were going to create a program, do legislation, and it needed some kind of funding source, then you had to find it. If you needed the program to have some kind of funding, you needed to find the funding source. So I said, let me go ahead and work a fact sheet on how this program came to play. Because I'm not going to take away from the good speaker who saw the vision 14 in the 24th Guam Legislature, which was how many years ago? 14 years ago, right? How this program came to play. And the vision that he saw, that in order to provide a better quality of life for our children, this was one way of doing it, was providing them a home. Providing a family to come home and know that this is theirs. Surveys have shown that when a family has something to call their own, their living environment, families come together. The continuity of supporting families in as far as education and as far as raising families to become better citizens within their environment is truly exemplified when they have something that's their own. That was created in the 24th Guam Legislature by the good speaker from Barragata, Speaker Ben Pangilinan, and I'm not going to take that away from him. And when that program started, Madam Speaker, they were able to ascertain 125 applicants And they did awesome. They had so much revenue stimulating into the economy. But I think that funding source only lasted 6 months because there was not enough money to continue the program. I want to say, moving fast forward in the 31st Guam Legislature, which is real near, it just passed us. A lot of us in here were a part of that. The good speaker and you yourself created legislation to see this program re-synergized. And I know you don't doubt that because we needed to see what we could do to provide homes for our people. And in that resolution, Bill 79-32 became public law 3166, giving $500,000 to assist families in building their dream homes. Madam Speaker, we assisted 70 family members. And it just wasn't to Guam Housing Corporation. I have here that those 70 families that were assisted went to all these different banks and corporations and financial institutions within the community. And I want to tell you, Madam Speaker, as another fact that, and we've talked about it, that out of that 70 families assisted from that $500,000, 17 were funded by the Guam Housing Corporation, and 53 were funded by other banks and credit unions. The total of the real estate sales from the real estate sales or the constructions of these homes yielded $12 million in transaction. With that, grants averaging 6,857 were given to folks who qualified. There's a minimum, Madam Speaker, on that, and there's a maximum. And the maximum grant that you can receive if you qualify for this grant funding program, first-time homeowners program, is up to $10,000. Madam Speaker, I want to share with you that based on that $500,000 and the facts that I just shared with you, this is how the layer of that stimulus economic revenue source that stimulated our economy worked. Realtors have been used to assist families in buying their homes, so commissions are paid to realtors, thereby receiving income which will yield GRT revenues to the government of Guam, or it's not GRTs anymore, it's business privilege taxes. If homeowners are building on their own land, then contractors will build the home, and the revenues, such as the GRTs or the BBTs, wages from the employee used to build the home, are paying FICA into the government of Guam. Contractors buy goods, they buy and services from building suppliers. Architect services are being utilized, engineering services, surveying services, heavy equipment services. All of these examples that I've just given, Madam Speaker, pay for the gross receipt, the business privilege taxes. I gotta get GRTs out of my mind. On the revenues they receive and taxes on payrolls, they pay to sustain their employment base. The escrow companies receive fees at closing and during the preliminary title research phase of this transaction. The revenues they receive also pay for the GRTs and payroll taxes when sustaining their employment base. Appraisers make revenue on these transactions as well because bank needs the value in order to finance the product. The income derived from the appraisal fee pays GRT and payroll taxes when sustaining their employment base. Banks make closing fees and in most cases earn a servicing fee when managing the mortgage portfolio sold to Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. These revenues sustain the bank employment which pay payroll taxes into the government of Guam. If the loan is not a Freddie or Fannie Mac and in a house portfolio fund, that fund stays in Guam for the bank to re-lend those funds it receives to other borrowers. Local insurance companies, Madam Speaker, such as Moylands, Nambos, Great National, Calvos, AM Insurance, Cassidy's, and many other insurance providers for home ownership also play a crucial role in ensuring the assets funded by the bank for the 30-year life of the mortgage. These revenues generated by the insurance provider also pays GRTs and payroll taxes into our government of Guam. Homeowners also contribute to the economy monthly because they pay for services and such goods as water, power, telephone, grocery, which is considered other disposable income to sustain the quality of life for their families, for their family needs, Madam Speaker. And I want to say all of these companies and agencies receive these revenues to sustain their employment base, which also pays into the government. I want to tell you, Madam Speaker, as I mentioned all those examples, there's a list of things from a bank application or a mortgage application that says ABC needs to be done. It's a whole list of fees and payments. Madam Speaker, I'm not taking away from the program. I don't want to take away from the program. I want to be able to say that we found a resource that will look at providing to make this program work. Yesterday we talked about the multiplying factor. Today I gave you facts about how that multiplying factor will work and how much money will be generated to go back into the community and circulate into the community. I'm not taking from Peter to pay Paul. I'm taking from a revenue source that, yes, is a part of what the government of Guam generates, but it will yield so much more money that goes back into the government. And what I want to share is, as we look at providing this, if we were given this money today based on what is cheated to us, and if we look at that funding source, the multiplying factor and the stimulus that would be generated would be in the millions. And based on all those examples that I gave to you, that would pay back into the GRTs. Where or how can that be wrong for us? am the oversight chair of housing. You found a way that we could help. And I'm saying that if we, based on the vision that the good speaker from Barragata did to create this program to move forward, we found a funding source. If we continue that funding source, the generation based on what will be stimulated and created because of the layers, that would be a win-win for the community. I know we have to pay. I know there's major things that the government, we as policymakers have to look at, that we as policymakers have to be frugal on. We as policymakers have to make sure that the basic mission mandate for the government of Guam is to provide for the basic services. And if we can find programs that will continue to benefit and better the quality of life for our children and our families, then let's give it a shot. The good speaker from Cañada talked about saying that we can change. If a program didn't work, we can come back to this August body and make the changes. Madam Speaker, if we had to look at additional funding based on the proposed dormant accounts coming to us today, based on what's existing today from 2008 till today, based on what this legislation has, and we were to yield that 2 million plus, we could help hundreds of families. And that could generate, based on the average and the formula that's being utilized today, can create $54 million in transactions and stimulus, just based on the multiplying factor. I share this with you, Madam Speaker, is because whatever is provided to us, I can say that if we fund this program and continue to fund this program, I know and I believe in my heart, and that this is a true statement, that we will be able to do good for our people here on Guam. Those who want to provide for a better quality of life, those who want to have home ownership and realize something better for their families, those who want to better educate and know that if their children grow up, there is a place where they can go to and know that what dreams that their parents have received, that they can go ahead and try that. 14 years ago, we did this, Madam Speaker, and it stopped. In midstream, it stopped. And a lot of folks were disappointed. Why can't we at least try? At least try to give this program a shot. Madam Speaker, I've said it over and over again. I don't want to take away from what the good speaker of Barragata did when he introduced this bill and all the other bills that came after, to make sure that this program started to run again and be re-synergized. But my heart will break if we'd have to do this one shot again, help only a few families. If we yielded that again, I said, maybe 316 families just for that one-time shot. I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, take that multiplying factor and the layers that it creates to pay into the government of Guam. I'm not taking, I'm giving back. And that's the vision I see. And that's all I want, is give this program a shot. Give this program the opportunity to continue to grow and continue to be sustainable so that our families can be able to realize that tomorrow or that Guamanian dream. So, Madam Speaker, I only ask that my colleagues please give this program and its continuing appropriation a fair shot as we look at this funding source and as we look at all the other factors that need to be paid. I know that we as the government policymakers have to make sure that we find funds. And this is one way of getting creative and adding more with what we have. They have always said it, build it and they will come. In order for things to be successful, you have to pay in to get back. And this is what I'm asking for. Not much, but something from the heart. And I will continue to work with anybody and everybody, all the stakeholders out there, to realize, to all the realtors out there, I know times are hard. This is another way of helping that community. Just one of many layers to continue to infuse more revenue back into the government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts from the heart and share some facts as Oversight Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My apologies. I'm feeling a little under the weather. I too had the time to go home and reflect after we recessed yesterday. And in reflecting, I was very, very disappointed in myself. I was very disappointed in myself because I allowed my passion on not only the amendment that we were talking about that day, but also on regarding Bill 81. I allowed my passions to cause me to disregard or have a lesser regard for my words. And I wanted to, on the record, apologize to my Republican colleagues for my lack of temperance. I'm learning, and I will continue to try to do better. I never want my passion to undermine the merit of the positions that I take, and so I ask for the gracious reconsideration of my colleagues. Part of that passion, Mr. Speaker, also comes from not fully understanding the positions of everybody. So I think it would be very helpful for us also if we're going to be voting particularly against measures that we dialogue about it, because it's important also for us to understand where everybody's coming from so that we can learn from it and weigh the merits of it and use it as a basis for our decisions also going forward. I'm rising in opposition of this amendment, Mr. Speaker, in large part for the reasons you stated. We have a lot of things that we have to pay. And I think that we're getting a little off track in terms of whether or not it's an all or nothing proposition of applying these issued monies for this program. I fully support the bill and the notion of placing these funds for that purpose for 1 year. And that would provide a dramatic amount of stimulus for the program. It will allow for a lot of people to purchase their first time home. However, I believe that it's important for us to stimulate now and have that money available for when our bills are coming due. And the bills, as you so eloquently put it in your previous commentary, Mr. Speaker, are very dramatic. aside from the $70 million in unanticipated landfill expenses, we do have the $15 million in debt service in 2015. We have the $8 million in the balloon payment for the Guam Memorial Hospital that will also be due. And that comes up to $93 million. And we need to have that money available, because when those bills come due, the money's going to have to come from somewhere. And that's where I'm particularly concerned, not just for the families who will be purchasing these first-time homes, but for our entire island. You see, this program is designed for those who need additional assistance to be able to go out and buy their first-time home. And so it can be reasonably extrapolated that these same individuals are the ones who are relying a lot on our public services. And if we're going to be taking money today to allow them to build their homes only to shortchange the very government that they are relying on for services 2 years down the road, is a great disservice. That money is going to have to come from somewhere, and I don't want us to shortchange our schools. That money is going to have to come from somewhere, and I don't want us to shortchange our hospital. That money is going to have to come from somewhere, and I don't want to shortchange the safety of our community. Having a new home and then having it broken into because we don't have the resources to keep it safe from a community perspective is very, very tragic. So that's the reason why, Mr. Speaker, I rise in objection to the amendment. Let's allow for the money to be available for this 1 year, and then every year thereafter, let's make sure that money is going to be available to allow this government to continue to provide the vital services that it's responsible to provide to our people. I wanted to address some of the other issues that were brought forward with regards to stimulus spending. I understand stimulus spending, Mr. Speaker, but we need to put it in perspective to obligations that are undoubted and actual. Over the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker, our government has borrowed $700 million, more or less. Our debt service in 2002 was our outstanding debt in 2002 was 400 plus million. And putting that into perspective, we grew our tourism industry, we grew our service industry, we grew a lot of industries in the 80s, into the 90s. And in 2002, all of that growth put us into debt by 400 million. Since 2002, over the last 10 years, we've borrowed 700 million on top of that. And we haven't had that same level of growth. That 700 million that we've borrowed didn't go and get shipped off island. It didn't go to make an investment overseas. It circulated in our economy. It supposedly stimulated our economy. But there is none among us and none in our community who can say that after spending $700 million of the people's money, we've had growth anywhere near the kind of growth that we've had when we only borrowed $400 million in 2002. We need to be prudent about our idea of stimulus. And yes, building homes is a great way to inject stimulus money into our economy, but not at the expense of the obligations that we're going to have, that we know we're going to have years down the road. I appreciate the very, very good work of the Oversight Chairman of Housing, who's built homes with her work, worked with others to build homes. That's got to be magical. It's got to feel really, really great. I also have a great appreciation for all the work that Mr. Carlos Camacho has done to bring a new level of service in the area of affordable housing. I mean, he has just been a tremendous asset to the people of Guam in the work that he does. However, we need to be mindful of the fact that putting in $500,000 and turning it into 12 million is not just an automatic function of math. Otherwise, if it was truly that simple, we should take the entire budget of the government of Guam and just dump it into this program because it's going to create all this stimulus and we're going to create all these homes and it's going to all come back to us anyway. But there's a law of diminishing returns, Mr. Speaker, and we must not make investments at the expense of the obligations that we know are coming due. That's like saying that I'm going to continue to invest, put money aside in my paycheck and keep plowing it away to invest it, in spite of the fact that I know that I have loans to pay with that money. And that is the fundamental thing that we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker. Let's go ahead and stimulate now with what we have. But going forward, let's make sure that we're putting the money aside that we need to put aside to pay these obligations that we know are coming due. Everybody who manages their money knows that you can't just keep putting it into investments when you have debts that you need to pay. So let's stimulate now. Let's dump $1 million into the program now and create all those homes now. But in the years going forward, let's make sure that the money's going to be there to pay our bills. And it was stated that, we can do this now, and if we ever need to undo it in the future, we can go ahead and come back and undo it. And it's true, we can. But the legislative reality is that that's a very difficult thing to do. We have so many things over the course of the history of this government that we've put into motion that are very, very difficult to undo. So it would be prudent for us from the onset to do it right, stimulate now, sunset it, so that as those bills come due, we have the money to make those payments. And we're not going to be shortchanging all of the other public services, the people's government, our schools and our hospital, all the things that these very same families are going to be relying on. And that's why I rise in objection of this amendment, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Senator Respicio next on the list, and then Speaker Wonpan. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Uggan after the Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to first commend you for your very eloquent presentation on this bill. I want to recognize your passion in reminding this body just how much obligations we have facing the government of Guam. And it's no different from what you said in 2006, Mr. Speaker, when you were the first one to say that we have a $1 billion deficit. Or I'm sorry, $1 billion, you said a $1 billion deficit at the time. And the administration, in numerous public hearings, in numerous oversight hearings, in numerous presentations before the legislature, they said you were wrong. A former chief of staff to a former governor said that your abacus was off. And they've criticized you, they berated you, they said that you're making all of these things up. And after you stepped out of that legislature because you ran for higher office, I carried on your torch and I kept insisting that you were correct, that we do have a $1 billion debt, notwithstanding the obligations owed to the retirement fund at the time. The retirement fund alone was $1 billion. And Mr. Speaker, I shared your frustration in even trying to get the elected public auditor to recognize that we have a $1 billion debt. And she was parsing terms and said that we may have a $1 billion debt, but then we don't have a $1 billion deficit. And so they spent all this energy refuting what you were saying over and over, whether it was a debt, whether it was a deficit. I even gave a speech before the government accountants to carry your message forward that this government is facing serious financial crisis, and instead of giving alcohol to a drunk and enabling that person, we have to recognize that we have this problem and be very open about it. And so, Mr. Speaker, what I had to do in the subsequent legislature with my colleagues at the time was introduce a bill that said anytime the administration is testifying to the legislature on matters regarding finances of the government of Guam, their department, their agency, doesn't matter whether it's a public hearing or whether it's an oversight hearing, whether it's a roundtable meeting, whenever the administration officials are representing financial information to the legislature, they have to do it under oath and under penalty of perjury. And at the time, I was berated also, thinking I'm just making trouble and driving this wedge between administration's officials. But what I saw as a result of that law, Mr. Speaker, and my colleagues, is that law protected these rank and file government employees. When they came down here, they had to tell the truth. And so my point is, at the time, within 6 months, Mr. Speaker, you recall, we went from everything is okay, Senator Cruz is making these things up, his abacus is broken. Senator Spicio is just trying to mimic what Senator Cruz is saying, so those two are off. Senator Pangilinan is off, his numbers are always off. Meanwhile, someone else was saying we're projecting on target, even though, as you put it, the target keeps changing. Wherever that dart lands, they move the target, then they call it a bullseye. And so we went within 6 months from everything is okay to this government is going to tank. How does a multi-billion-dollar corporation tank within 6 months? It was always sinking, Mr. Speaker, and that's the point that we try to bring to light. And so when we are faced with all this monies owed to, first, I want to talk about the Lejan landfill and recognize how you pointed out that there's $70 million that weren't budgeted. I've gone on record saying that Lejan is the worst site to build a landfill, never mind the 7.7 million gallons of water that flows through that area, never mind that the decision to acquire that property through condemnation was done before the environmental assessments were made. Never mind all those things, because we know what the facts are, we know what the truth is, Mr. Speaker. And so we were told at the time that the condemnation of that property was only going to be about 3 to 5 million, and that we're just an alarmist, we're making things up. And so we see through the condemnation process that the court actually ordered an additional $25 million to be paid to those landowners. And then when we were addressing the bonds, we were asking the very tough questions, recognizing that these monies are owed to taxpayers and it's our obligation to pay them. And to not want to pay taxpayers is the same thing as stealing from these taxpayers. But because I was one of those who asked the very tough questions, particularly how their 10-year forecast kept changing, it just kept changing, and we were told, never mind how we're going to pay it back, just borrow this money, borrow $343 million because that's what we have to do. So we asked how we're going to be able to pay this back, and as you know, we were told it's the China visa waiver, it's the military buildup, it's a lot of hope on the horizon, a lot of optimism, and we're going to go out to the bond market. The time is very ripe to pay this. And then we saw that their payback projections were going to begin, I believe, in 2015, and so they're just deferring all these payments. And so if you go with the accounting principle and recognize the deficit, which is short-term, the debt is long-term, we've taken short-term debt and span it out over 30 years, and now we have this administration saying we have a $10 million surplus. I know it's very perplexing to really understand whether or not we do have that $10 million surplus, and yet taxpayers are still owed money. They're not paying tax refunds as quickly as they ought to be based on the current law that's established. There's a court order that says that they have to pay within 6 months. And although this administration has gone on record saying that we cannot withhold taxpayer money from taxpayers, it's theirs, it's rightfully owed, and I would agree with that 100%, Mr. Speaker, but yet when that court judgment is made, they go to appeal it saying, oh, you're preaching to the choir, we don't need that kind of mandate. And so when I sit here and listen to those kinds of arguments about how the landfill is still $70 million short, how those decisions to borrow all that money on the bond market, which I voted for, by the way, and help with our colleagues to write the additional $115 million to borrow more money to pay more taxes, because that's what the priority is of this government ought to be. When we do all those things, recognizing that these monies are really shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and we see bills such as Bill 79, authored by the good speaker, where she's working more creatively to try to find some other means to continue these kinds of very important programs. You know, this bill is really reflective of the kind of fiscal crisis that we're in and the very tough financial challenges that we face. It's also kind of similar to what the good sponsor did, where she recognized that there were 1 million miles available through the Department of Administration for all those credit card charges that they used to, and then in exchange they get all these miles that were just being banked. So when the good speaker said, I want to take those 1 million miles, and I want to support a law that you had, Mr. Speaker, that did a $200,000 appropriation to provide for off-island students to participate in educational and cultural or whatever sports activity, whatever is going to be beneficial to their own upbringing and molding them into the young adults that we want them to be. And so when that idea came forward, there was some struggle again that maybe half of this should go to the medical program, and which of course that's another very legitimate need and an area that we have to address. And it went from 50% to asking her to give up 100%. And so I'm seeing the same thing where the speaker here has identified $2.1 million to support a very important program to the Guam Housing Corporation that would make our people, those who qualify for this program, realize the dream of home ownership. And so recognizing that there's an obligation with the Lejan landfill, recognizing that beginning 2015 we have a $15 million payment to be made on the bonds, recognizing that there's all these other financial obligations such as increments that have been withheld through the suspension of the Hay Study implementation. Mr. Speaker, we see all of these things over and over and over, but what I'm asking all of us to do is to not lose sight of what this particular legislation aims to do, notwithstanding all the other challenges and how this $2.1 million should be better spent somewhere else. What we have before us is a bill that would take $2.1 million from these escheated accounts, give it to the Guam Housing Corporation, and support a very important program that one of our colleagues, Speaker Pangilinan, created, and we supported throughout the years. And so I guess, you know, you always tell me that when a judge is in a courtroom, the only thing that judge looks at is what's before that judge. And so what's before us is Bill 79-32, and what's before us is the sponsor, through the public hearing process, has committee report that shows that over the next fiscal years up to FY 2015, this monies will yield $2.1 million. And this bill has asked us to take the $2.1 million and put all these monies into this program so that Guam Housing can continue with its very important mission. Mr. Speaker, do you recall a couple of years ago when Guam Housing had a surplus of about $12 million and how there was a lot of struggles again within the legislature to, I believe there was even one idea by a former colleague to take all that money and give it to Rev and Tax, so Rev and Tax can go and collect more money and we can generate more revenue. And so when Guam Housing saw that the legislature was eyeing that cash surplus, they moved very quickly to jumpstart all of these programs that they were supposed to do. And my understanding is that they're operating now on a net loss. Although we were told yesterday, based on an audit, that they have these cash surpluses, that audit is about a year old. And so if you look at the bank statement, it's going to show a very different picture. Just as several terms ago, when we were told by a previous appropriations chairman how the audit shows that there's all this money in this one account, but the administration at the time said, but look at the bank balances, because that audit is a year old. And so we find ourselves in the reverse position where we're asked to accept that the Guam Housing Corporation has all this surplus based on an audit that's a year old, and yet they've communicated to us that they don't have any more money, Mr. Speaker, to support these first-time home borrowers. And so I rise in support of the bill. I know that the sponsor of the bill is amenable to finding the best way forward in terms of what this body can understand and accept, in terms of what one initiative is to have it for 1 year, the other initiative is to have it available in perpetuity. Hopefully, Mr. Speaker, there could be some common ground that all of us can agree to, so that we can get on with the business of Bill 79-32, and so we can get on with the business of supporting Guam Housing Corporation's mission, and so that we can go on with the business of waiting for the administration to give us their plan on how they propose to have all of these obligations met. And I suspect that they probably got word that the China visa waiver is going to happen because GVB is already doing a symposium. Yeah, I said that because maybe that's how they believe that we're going to be able to make all of these huge payments beginning in FY 2015. So notwithstanding what's going to happen down the road, I think we have a big opportunity here as the legislature, all 15 of us, to say that these monies shall be escheated, given over to Guam Housing Corporation, so they can realize, those applicants that qualify can realize the dream of home ownership. And I also want to echo the sentiments, very eloquent comments of our good senator from Talafofo. Did you say Talafofo via Dedido or Dedido via Talafofo? But I want to be sure that you know I'm talking about Senator Nicholas, who very eloquently raised all of these concerns and very appropriately recognized our oversight chair of housing for her passion in wanting to make sure that we do whatever we can now to help these people who qualify for these loans, but Guam Housing can't do the loans because there's no cash for it. And so I thank you for the opportunity to present my position on Bill 7932 as well as the amendment. And I remind you, Your Honor, that the issue before us is Bill 79-32. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't throw me your gavel.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, of course, we sat here and I've heard the testimonies and the passion in the speakers, and I heard yes, and I've taken it to heart. Former speaker from Barrigano. I've also heard, of course, our senator who is somewhere between Talafofo and Dedido, and I applaud him, of course, because he really is taking revenue tax to task to make sure that we do collect the monies that are owed to the government. I hear you, heard you, Mr. Vice Speaker, and I thank you also for representing myself in the legislature yesterday to hear what other obligations the government has. And we're hearing from families too who want to have a home. Maybe not their dream home, but surely a home where they can come in and, take their shoes off and relax and say that this is their home. And I have to say that I have to give a lot of credit to our legislative secretary for her passion. and her drive and how she meticulously went through all of the different ways in which this project would be able to have that multiplier effect to be able to stimulate again and bring more monies into the economy. And I have to also send appreciation as well to our senator who proffered this amendment. Where are you from, Zach? AFME. He moves around a lot, so, but AFME it is, who is just as passionate as well and want to help not just the families, but also our economy. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, the days when it used to be when we would look at bills that were proffered years and years and years ago, and I say that primarily because in those days it was that if a request came in, and sometimes just to be able to get either somebody off your back who's been bugging you to introduce legislation or asking for an appropriation when in fact we know there is no money, those days are basically gone. And the rule has been, yes, is that, you know, if, and through the budget session, when we say that, oh my gosh, there's just not enough money there, I want to put in more money in another area. And the question always has been, where then do you want to identify to delete that source of funding from a department to give to another department by robbing Peter to pay Paul? And when it really came down to that, it was a very difficult decision to make. And many times we don't even go there. In this particular case, as our legislative secretary had stated, and the chairperson, of course, of housing, and her, you know, desire, of course, is to help this corporation to be able to meet the needs of our low-income families. That she, of course, you know, would want to say that, you know, as she said it, and I'm saying it as well, is the identification of some monies, of course, that have been available that, you know, could have just basically, yes, by the normal course of the law, that once it's already, then after 10 years of being in the bank, it gets cheated to the government. Then after it meets that time frame, then of course it goes right into the general fund then for appropriation. What this bill, of course, would be doing is sort of catching it before it actually happens. And we are, yes, all concerned that we are having, you know, less and less monies come into our economy. And that's a heavy burden for everyone here to know then that we do have these looming balloon payments that have to be made, the looming amount of monies that you just heard from the district court that we would have to also address. And I know that everyone here is concerned. But we also know too, and I'm learning this myself because I'm primarily an educator by profession. I'm not an economist. I'm not a banker. I'm a small, if there's such a word, mas dikiki na business owner, although you may differ and have a different opinion. But I learn these things and I speak to people. I have friends in the community. I have, you know, friends, of course, business friends. I have colleagues as well here that, you know, we all have a dialogue about, you know, how is it that we really want to help and how creative can we really get to be able to do all these things, knowing how limited the funds are and how our hands are tied. But I'm also taught of this concept that I had a very difficult time actually dealing with, especially when I don't have any money or when the government doesn't have any money, is that to make money, you have to spend money. And I remember the first time I heard that and I said, God, you're crazy, because how can I spend money to make money when I don't even have the money to spend so I can make money, if that makes any sense. But I have to have faith as well in that, you know, business concept to know then that, you know, it has worked before and it can work today. But I'm not saying that that's what we want to do totally, that we're just going to take it all then and put it in that concept and then just let it, you know, grow and let it build, of course, the money that we hope for it to build. It's going to have to be a combination of things. So we can't just spend money to make money when we're not going to tighten our belts somewhere else. So it's a combination of things that we all have to do as a government. And I'm learning that every day. But the one lesson that I've learned since I first came into this legislature, which was a very difficult lesson as well for me, and that is that the art of politics is compromise. Because coming from a school system, everything to me was black and white, not this gray area, and surely not to compromise. Because when you believe in what it is you want to do, you want to stick to it. And the one thing that I learned is that many times in the past, I've lost. My pride was hurt. I didn't get what I wanted. And I'll never forget a most recent comment again now, which is, compromise is that you get what you can get. And it wasn't until, again, last night that I had spoken to several individuals to be able to provide more information to us, and my conversation as well with legal counsel to make sure, too, that the monies that we're going to be put in here, that these monies will be protected, that they will be in a locked box in the sense that it will not expire at the end of the fiscal year. It's not one where we're going to put language to say it will carry over. We're not going to use the language to say that until it's expended. It's to make sure that the monies that are in this trust fund will be used exactly for what it is that's authorized by the First-Time Homeowners Assistance Program. And I want to make sure that that language is correct and that what we're trying to do will do just that. The other thing as well, in speaking with the director of the Department of Administration, and based also on his testimony, and I have his testimony here, that these dormant accounts, yes, could really realize this balance if several things are done. One is that what is available for achievement is about $1.2 million in some sense. Then for fiscal year 2013, then for revenues from those achievement funds will be about $436,000 and some change. And then for fiscal year 2014, what we could realize will be approximately $900,000. So when you take all that, and that's what I'm offering here, and I realize that, of course we have this amendment that is being proffered, but this is what I like to offer in place of that amendment, is that instead we say that during the fiscal year 2013 and 2014, so we'll realize all those monies, but it's not something's going to be time memorial that then will just forever, because we all know anyway that we can't tie the hands of future legislatures. And who knows? Maybe the next legislature might just say that, yes, we want to do it in another couple of years, or we will just say, no, this is just going to end. This is the one-time stimulus that, the 32nd Guam Legislature wanted to do. I can't hold whoever it is in the future, the 33rd or 34th or 35th Guam Legislature, in their wisdom and in their research and the rationale and how the economy is like, what they would do. But I know that today, this is what I think majority of us would like to do, or all of us would like to do really, is to help these homeowners. But it's the method, I think, that we're all concerned about. And it is, of course, the amounts of money that we're talking about. And it's also how is it going to affect the budget year? How is it going to reflect on our economy and all that? So this is the compromise that I want to offer. And if I may, then, Mr. Speaker, is that, and I've just kind of rearranged the language, and I'm hoping then that if I could just go ahead and read this at least, is that how I would like to substitute this for the language I know that we're discussing, to actually say that during fiscal year 2013 and fiscal year 2014, that the Treasurer of Guam shall deposit funds escheated pursuant to 11 GCA, and the number is 106119, into the Housing Trust Fund, which was established, of course, and that's by law, for Article 10, Chapter 4, so legal counsel would have that number, and that such funds will be used in accordance with the provisions of the First-Time Homeowner Assistance Program Act and such funds. In addition, and the reason why I say in addition, because this is, yesterday when we got the spreadsheet, they were showing that yes, over a 30-year period, there's about 2.2 that could be realized in the loans, but that for this year, and even last year and every year, there'll be little amounts. And I think for this year, there was like about $93,000, I mean, so far as of May, will be realized, but that those funds then will be, continue to be used with, along with these escheated funds, for the First-Time Homeowners Assistance Program. So that will be my amendment to this amendment to replace or substitute it for the other amendment.
I see Senator Duenas rising, and then I saw Senator Atta's hand go up. So
Yeah,
we'll go
just a-
with Senator Duenas and then Senator Atta.
Actually, just a point of information, Mr. Speaker. So this is an amendment to the amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's fine.
Senator Atta?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise in support of the proposed amendment. However, I do have two questions. First of all, my support for the amendment is the fact that we're trying to, at least for these 2 fiscal years, inject some funds into there to provide some kind of a stimulus to be able to at least address that aspect of our socioeconomic needs. I, however, have 2 specific questions and concerns. One is the fact that it seems that, there's not really a clear picture of how much of these funds we actually expect to be transferred over. We've seen different reports. I've heard $1 million. I've heard 400,000. I don't know. And there's that possibility that could be a lot more in there. So if in the end we find that there's a lot more, $2-3 million, is that really the intent, that we want that much in there? Regardless of how much, for those 2 years, whatever you got in your pocket, we'll take it. And so I would like to see that maybe there's a cap, that during fiscal year 2013 and 2014, the amount of up to, let's say, $1 million would be transferred over. So at least we know that there's a definite amount. And if in fact it turns out that there is more, then that is money that should go towards other future needs that had been suggested earlier. The other concern that I have is the fact that these monies are going to be transferred over, but at least I've seen where transfers were made, and at least there's no requirement, at least I haven't seen anything here, where somebody has to come back for an accounting. I mean, I guess we're going to depend on, the committee chair having to call an oversight hearing or whatever, but there's no requirement here for an accounting to bring in the department and say, all right, you've been given this amount of money, what have you done with it? Oh, well, we haven't been able to move on it because for one reason or another. And so I'm concerned that there's not this, here's the money, come back and see me in 6 months or every 6 months, so that we see where we are at, and if it seems that there are obstacles that you're encountering, maybe then legislative intervention may be appropriate to kind of remove those obstacles so that we move forward to achieve the objectives that we have. So I have those 2 concerns, and I would, maybe if the author would yield, maybe she could address those 2 concerns. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that question. I think you are right. and I love the fact that we will want to, proper language. I like to speak to legal counsel to prepare that language, which there would be a reporting to the legislature, of course, of the accounts that they have and how much, of course, they have given out in loans. So I would hope that then we'll be able to do just that. Okay, so the senator has the amendment to do that? Okay, all right. The other than, and I think this would be, and it's great, and we can pull it directly out of the committee report. And what I do is I write it. I'll read it. The amounts is that yes, I think it'd be great to go ahead and actually state these amounts that's given to us. Is that my mama give you all the full amount to the cents, but what's currently available is $1,217,386.36. That's available right now to be escheated. Then then we can state for fiscal 2013, then what will be additional would be $436,057.35, and then for fiscal year 2014, there's 900,000 available. So I think that would answer the question, that we can list those amounts down that's to be escheated.
The chair is going to take a short recess to have everybody meet with legal counsel. There seems to be a problem with the amendments to the amendments to the amendments, and we've got to clarify it.
Thank you again very much, Mr. Speaker. And just to clarify then that the amendment that I'm using to substitute what was proffered earlier is that it would read the section 3 fiscal year 2013 dormant and inactive account revenues, and the language is to add, of course, to make, I mean, I've got the wording, but to assure everyone that it's during what is available for statement, the dollar amount, of course, for year 2013 and 2014. And then the other speakers will provide the other
Okay.
amendments. Okay, thank you.
So on the WANPAT amendment, is there an objection? Senator Addy, you recognized? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. No, actually, Senator Uggan was on the list before him. No, okay. Senator Addy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So then the amendment that I would proffer with respect to the specifying amounts is that on the amendment itself, on the second line where it reads, "The Treasurer of Guam shall deposit," I want to add the following: shall deposit up to $1,653,440 for FY 2013, and up to $900,000 for fiscal year 2014. And these numbers was from the committee report, as was presented by the Deputy Director of Department of Administration, where he provided the amounts.
Thank you. On the ADA amendment to put in those two amounts, 1.4 and 900 plus, anybody wish to address it? Any objection? Oh, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I would like to stand not only in support of the proposed amendment, Mr. Speaker, but really in terms of notification. We're going to enact legislation. We're all having issues in regards to how much is actually in this account, how much could conceivably be transferred, but will there be a notification mechanism so that, in fact, either the Chair of Appropriations or the Speaker of the Guam Legislature or the Chair of the Guam Housing Corporation can at least get notification that these are the sums that have been transferred? Because if you notice, the amendment caps it at a certain level. For fiscal year 13, it's up to the sum of $1.6 million. And when that transfer is effectuated, I think that would be
Okay.
excellent information for this body to have in terms of
So
understanding how the
let
program
me
works.
first take Senator Ada's amendment on the two numbers, and after those have been accepted, if there's no objection, then I will entertain your motion for notification. So on the ADA amendment on the two amounts, 1,000,004 and 900.
No, it's two amounts.
Two.
Can we take a recess?
Again, please.
One more time, the amendment should read, Treasurer of Guam shall deposit up to $1,653,440 for fiscal year 2013 and up to $900,000 for fiscal year 2014.
On that objection, on that amendment, any objection? Thank you. Then, Senator Nicholas, I understand you have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in light of these new amendments to the original amendment as proffered by Senator Duenas, I'd like to withdraw my objection to the amendment as amended.
Thank you very much. So there's no objection. Senator Munya Barnes, do I understand you have a whole new, oh wait, no, there's the notice, there's a notice that you wanted to have that the Director of Administration shall notify the Speaker of within 30 days of the transfer.
Mr. Speaker, in that regard, I thank you very much for recognizing me, but the chair, with the oversight over the Guam Housing Corporation, has a prepared amendment that would be consistent with my request. So
Okay.
I yield. Thank you, Ms.
So then you can close, Senator Duenas, on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I had 9 bullet points to speak to closing the amendment, but in the spirit of cooperation and seeing that we all have recognized the value of compromise, understanding that this program has the true capacity now to prove itself, but that we also reserve the right in future fiscal years to use this funding source for other reasons if this program doesn't vet itself out as we believe it will. I really appreciate the work that this body has done. So I will dispense of addressing all the eloquent comments that were put forward on the floor, and I would like to now thank the body for accepting this amendment, and I appreciate the opportunity to close. And once again, thank you to all of my colleagues, especially those who moved very valuable amendments to the amendment.
There being hearing no objection to the amended Duenas amendment, Senator Munya Barnes.
Si Jusmasi Talo, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in line of the retiring speaker's presentation, I do personally want to thank him for the efforts and all the other efforts with my colleagues that they've made in reference to working with this bill. With that being said, I want to add a new section to the bill to read. New section 4 that I think it would be. The Department of Administration shall report each transfer made to the Guam Housing Corporation pursuant to this act within 5 days. Guam Housing Corporation shall report to the legislature at the end of each fiscal year the results of the transfer of its cheated funds in terms of homeowner assistance, and the legislature shall review the adequacy of funding to the first-time homeowners assistance program. I do have it in writing, and yes. And Mr. Speaker, this would address the concerns that the good senator from Jotnia brought up, but also further clarify the other senator from Mangilao. I think this amendment will satisfy those inquiries.
On the Munya Barnes amendment, I saw Senator Addis' hand go up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe if the author of the mover of the amendment would yield.
Sure.
I'm concerned about, so we have now this accounting mechanism. When DOA makes a transfer, they need to make that known. And then, of course, there is the accounting that's to be made by the Guam Housing Corporation. So they come down here at the end of the fiscal year and they said, okay, we put in $1.6 million in fiscal year 2013. They come back a year later and we say, okay, how much do you have in the account? Oh, we still have $1.6 million. So then we go to 2014, they put in another $900,000, and at the end of fiscal year 2014, we say, how much do you have in the account? Oh, now we have $2.5 million. So how long does this go? Or is it use it or lose it? And sometimes we need that little bit of motivation or encouragement that, you move on this thing. Here's your opportunity. Go and do it. If you can't, there are other equally pressing needs that this money could be used for. So it's going to be incumbent on the administrator and the agency itself to really move on this and maximize the availability of these funds. So I raised this concern, and maybe the mover of the amendment would like to address that.
Senator Muñoz.
I'll try to, I hope I can answer it right, Mr. Speaker. I want to share to the good Senator of Manguilao that, if I'm not mistaken, the funds that would go, the sheeted funds that would go to Guam Housing would be the funds all the way from 2013. And then in 2014, the last 900,000 will be given. What I'm trying to say is that every year, the funds will automatically, the two amounts will automatically go if this legislation is passed to Guam Housing. They would have already had that funds, and then they would disperse accordingly. They would come back at the end of the fiscal year to show us an update. For the 214, that would be an additional 900,000 that would already be automatic, and then they would give a disbursement on the update. But every year that this program is in existence, the Guam Housing Corporation will come back to this August body and give an accounting of what's been dispersed and what's pending and how many portfolios they have given out.
I think his question was, if they don't disperse any of this amount of money, what then?
No, they shall.
The question...
Then it goes, Mr. Speaker, if those monies aren't dispersed, then the good senator is probably saying then the money will be reverted back to the general fund. Is that what he's asking to do?
No,
Because
he's just
it would have
asking
already
what is
been
going to
given.
happen if it doesn't happen, if nothing is dispersed. And I'm hoping he's not going to have a use it or lose it, because sometimes that may be more wasteful. But
Thank you again. I may not be able to take it beyond where maybe we want, but at least to make some assurance, because that was the exact same question I had, and I sat with legal counsel, extensively yesterday after we recessed, because that's several things I wanted to do is to make sure that if the monies then are transferred into the housing trust fund, is that then what really would happen? And I stated that in my earlier discussion, is that per the existing statute, which is, of course, Article 10 of Chapter 4, Title 12, when the trust fund was created, that it will continually remain in that trust fund. And it shall, and I'm reading the words, of course, that was relayed to me by legal counsel, that it shall not lapse at the end of fiscal year 2013 and are not subject to transfer by the governor. So at least that part we know, that nobody can go in and put their hands in it to try to take the monies out. But I do understand, yes, is that we want them to move forward with this. And at least from what we know from testimonies is that there are 10 applications right now ready to close. And if, in fact, if you look at history where $500,000 was provided as seed money to get this going, 70 in less than 6 months applications were processed already. So if you even take that right, and that's at $500,000, and then of course you add that to about 140 in a year, conceivably then there will be, if we learn from history, that immediately then about, that other, it will be a million plus, plus a million for the 140 and then the 10, of course. So I honestly feel that this will move faster than we think, faster than a speeding bullet.
Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, when the ARA funds came out, the federal government actually said you had up until a certain period of time to encumber the funds. And then, of course, anything that wasn't encumbered basically got put back into the big pot and it was redivvied out. And then from the time that it was encumbered, the requirement was that then you had so much time to actually then expend. And I just raised this issue because during a period when we are certainly have very tight fiscal resources, everybody's got to be on board and moving ahead with the resources that are being provided to them. So I think it is certainly reasonable that then the requirement be imposed, and I'll use the word imposed, that from that the Guam Housing Corporation will have 12 months from the date that the funds are deposited. So the FY 2013 funds, the $1.6 million, they have up to 12 months to encumber the funds. So in other words, they're going to have to go out there, make sure they got applicants and try and get applicants qualified so that then we can say earmark so much of that for various applications. And then after that, of course, after they've encumbered the funds by having qualified applicants, then they have 12 months, another 12 months to actually disperse it. Maybe that, 24 months may be too long, but the point of my concern is that this thing has got to be in lockstep and has got to be moving. Otherwise, it could just, and a good example is down at the port. In 2010, they were provided a $48 million grant to do modernization work. In 2013, there were still $48 million sitting in the account. And so I think that's the kind of situation that we want to avoid. So I would ask the mover of the amendment and the sponsors to actually consider putting in that requirement that, this is not going to be in there forever. And, that eventually we're all going to forget about because it's been there forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Limtiaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bill. However, I have to agree with the retiring speaker that to leave this money in there would not be responsible. The whole idea of giving them the money is to stimulate the economy with the assumptions that it's going to result in increased tax revenues in the form of GRT and income taxes. If the money is not utilized, if it's not used and injected into the economy, all the assumptions that we're basing our support on for this bill would not be realized. Therefore, I have to agree with the former speaker that it needs to be utilized within a certain time frame, or it needs to revert back to the general fund. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Can I take just a quick recess?
left off with an amendment by, being proffered by Senator Munya Barnes. And, no, but, so any discussion on the amendment? I know Senator Tom Ada, you've had an amendment that you want to proffer to amend the amendment. Am I correct?
Just to add additional language.
Additional language. Oh, okay, so it's not to amend it, but okay, so.
No, we still want the report.
Yes, so we will.
Oh, no, that report remains. We're just saying that maybe we can add this language to that.
Okay, senators, yes, speak to me, so I will know what I need to do.
Yeah. Now, Madam Speaker, I think the amendment that was being proffered by the senator from Manguilao basically was placing a reporting requirement on the part of the Department of Administration when they make the transfer, and then a reporting requirement on the part of Guam Housing Corporation to come back at the end of the fiscal year or at a specified time to give an accounting of what they have done with the funds. So I would suggest that maybe we dispose of that amendment, and then I would like to make an additional amendment, which actually would be additional language to Section 4. Yes.
Okay, all right, so on the Munya Barnes amendment, are there any objections? There being none, so ordered. So Senator Ada, you're recognized on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam
Speaks.
Speaker. So I would like to proffer the amendment then to that new Section 4 that was just created to read as follows at the end of that section, that the Guam Housing Corporation shall encumber the transferred funds within 12 months of the transfer and dispersed within 18 months of said transfer. Funds not encumbered or expended shall revert to the general fund. So basically then what this means is, let's say that Department of Administration transfers $1 million June 1st, 2013. And so then the Guam Housing Corporation will have 12 months from that date to in a timely manner, qualify applications for these loans. And if during that 12-month period they've only been able to qualify $500,000 worth of applications, then the balance that is left unencumbered shall then revert to the general fund for other legitimate needs of the government. So then, in addition to then having qualified the 500,000, the applications that amounts to $500,000 in funds, they will then have an additional 6 months therefrom to be able to disperse the funds. So, you know, it's one thing to qualify them, it's another thing then to get that money dispersed out. So then, basically that disbursement of the funds should occur within an additional 6 months thereafter, or a total of 18 months from the date of transfer. So let's say out of the $500,000 that was encumbered, they were only able to disperse $300,000. So then the balance, the undispersed amount of $200,000 will then be gone, and it will revert. The balance will then revert to the general fund. So that's my amendment, Madam Speaker, and I will give the language to the clerk.
So on the amendments, is there anyone who wishes to speak? There being none, no objection, so ordered.
Senator Yamashita, on the main motion, on the bill as amended.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on Bill number 79-32. As always, as always, meaningful legislation requires thoughtful deliberation, and we certainly have been very thoughtful on this measure. And a lot of the conversation has been around the financial aspects, the business, the economy, the stimulus, the GRTs, the BPTs, and rightfully so, because the realities of our island community is that, the economic part of it. But what I want to do, Mr. Speaker, is I want to talk a little bit about not only the economic benefits that this measure will provide, but the social-emotional aspects that this measure will provide. Mr. Speaker, we're not only building houses or providing opportunities to build houses, but we're actually providing opportunities to build homes. And that is a difference. And there is a difference. There's a difference between having a structure put up and having a group of people coming together to live, to clean, to pray, to cook, to sleep, to wake up, to get ready for work, to get ready for school, to spend the weekends together. There's a real difference between a house and a home. And in the wisdom of the previous legislatures that brought this to fruition, there have been many families that were given a place to be. And while it is true that we have great financial woes around us, and there's great worries and consideration of how we're going to move forward in the most responsible manner, I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that this kind of initiative does help us address that. Because when we do have homes where our growing families can be, we really are addressing the social-emotional well-being of people. When we are giving them a place to be, we are tackling the toxic stress that many of our families find themselves in. When we are giving them the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to be in a home, we are addressing the situation that gives us the 4,000 child abuse rate that we find around us, where then you've got to find the first responders, you got to find the safe havens, you got to find the justice system, the systems of care. By giving families the opportunity for a home, Mr. Speaker, we are addressing our suicide rates. And while it has declined a little bit, we still are killing ourselves every 2 weeks, one of us. And at the top of that list, Mr. Speaker, as you know, are the Chamorros. By giving the opportunity to build a home, Mr. Speaker, we're addressing our violence rates, which are atrocious. We are addressing our homeless rates, which right now is over 1,000. I believe we're up to 1,300 homeless people that are actually being counted, and we admit that we're not really finding all of them. So, in addition to economic stimulus, Mr. Speaker, we're actually also addressing the socio-emotional well-being of our families, and we're chipping away. We're chipping away at what is hurting the fabric of our families. And it's a real serious issue on this island. So I stand in full support of 7932. I was honored by being asked to be a sponsor of this measure. And I did so because I understanding the economic challenges of our island, I also certainly understand the socioeconomic challenges, the socio-emotional challenges of our families. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to take this opportunity to say this again to this body, who has the responsibility of crafting policy so that we can be a healthy community with the thought of a hopeful life in front of us. And that is that our island really does need to invest in early childhood education. And until this island takes that seriously, we're going to have to continuously, over and over again, find programs, support programs that give our people a hand up. But if we do early childhood right, where every single child from the beginning is developed in a healthy manner so that workforce starts at the beginning, so that healthy decisions are fostered from the beginning, so that they take care of themselves physically, socially, emotionally, so that when they get to school, they take their learning opportunities seriously, so that when they graduate, they actually are ready for the world of work or for higher education. And that will only happen when this island gets serious about early childhood education, which today we think is not worth the investment. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank Madam Speaker and the Oversight Chair for Housing in sponsoring Bill number 7932. It is a hand up. I think there's been many compromises reached. I think the latest amendment will put to rest some of the concerns about the economic issue of this. But for now, it is a hand up for some of those families who actually do need that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. Senator Nicholas, you had your hand up on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to proffer another amendment to the bill. We've done a very good job today of trying to make sure that the money is going to be identified and that it's going to be going to the purpose of building these homes and that it's going to be expended in a timely fashion. I wanted to add another section to the bill. Please guide me, Mr. Speaker, because of all the amendments. The copy I have here ends at section 3. Did we add a new section 4? I would like to add a new section 5. Okay, a new section 5 before the effective date. That would state, all funds made available by this act shall only be expended on grants for first-time homeowners.
Okay, that's simple enough to follow. On the amendment to add a new section 4 and then have the clerk and the legal counsel renumber the sections accordingly, do you need to see that in writing, or are you guys okay with the presentation? I'll recognize Senator Uggan and then Senator Limtiaco. Senator Uggan had his hand up first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question, because I know that, and correct me please if I'm mistaken, that the funds are going to be directed to the Guam Housing Corporation for the first-time homeowner assistance program. Now, under that, I believe there's flexibility where it provides for both a loan and in some cases a grant. But the verbiage that is being applied right now is for grants. So did the sponsor of the amendment want to be inclusionary in terms of allowing flexibility of how the funds can be utilized? Otherwise, it would be grants, outright grants to assist families, where in fact I think that by virtue of including and providing that flexibility of grants/loans, there may be more families that may be assisted through this particular program. So I just would like to ask the sponsor if he would consider expanding the terminology of grant to include loans, which are part of this program.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Uggan. Senator Nicholas, do you yield to the questions to whether or not you like to expand your amendment to?
I do yield to the question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator Uggan, for that great question. Sure, let's include the loans. The whole purpose of the amendment, Mr. Speaker, is just to make sure that we're not going to be expending it on salaries, benefits, other equipment, that it's going specifically for the purpose of capitalizing the home ownership program. So grants and loans, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. So we'll just accept that as one amendment.
Yes,
So you
Mr.
clarified that it's grants and loans. Thank you also, Senator Uggan. Senator Limtiaco on the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we could just arise for a point of information, if we could just check, although I don't disagree or object to the amendment, it may be redundant in the sense that, according to Article 10, Chapter 4 of the bill, it says, shall be used in accordance with the provisions of the First-Time Homeowner Assistance Program Act. So the language may already exist in the existing act. So we just check that.
Okay, let
I
me
have a
defer
point of
to the.
information also to add to Senator Limtiaco, if I may.
Okay,
That-
thank you,
that
Senator
the grant-
Limtiaco. Senator
that-
Barnes.
That the grants that are being used for this program, it's a grant to get a loan. So I don't know if the terminology is needed, but we just need to know that the Guam Housing is giving grants so that they can obtain a loan, and I just wanted to note
But
that
the
for the
issue
record.
that Senator Limtiaco raised is
the issue of redundancy is
If it's
this
already
is a-
cited in the code.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll recognize Speaker Wampan on Senator Tiaco's concern.
Yes, and that's a very good question, and some clarification needs to be made, plus what's in the language that we've proffered. That it is definitely for grants and loans to first-time homeowners, but in the amendment that I added also, because you have to remember in the public law 31 dash, I'm not sure what that, 66 I think it is the most recent change in the homeowners assistance program, is that there is that $500 seed money to get it started, and it actually, the language of that said that it would come from within the operations of the agent of the corporation. And then one additional language is, aside from the infusion then now of about $2 million, is that there it says that other funds also, which is from not just, remember, the operations at one time, because that's a one-time deal, but then there's the monies that are coming in every time from the loans that are being made out on an annual basis, if you guys saw the spreadsheet. So it makes sense, and I understand exactly where the proffer of the amendment and those who are inquiring whether there are any other funds to be used. And I hope that will be able to clarify to some of our colleagues here.
Okay, the chair still recognizes Senator Limtiaco since he rose to a concern. Are you satisfied with that response, Senator Limtiaco?
Just as a point of information, if legal counsel can just confirm whether or not, so if we could take a short recess.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, there's no objections. We'll take a lunch recess and come back at 2 o'clock on that question for recess.